So, Abigail, you and I were just catching up briefly, and I figured it'd be easy to just jump right in. First off, really excited to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you.
I thought maybe we could first kick off talking about the origin and the birthing of Zenith Health. I think it's, well, one, in your case, you're pregnancy related, so birthing is even more relevant than ever. But given your, background with operations, with data mining, I'd love to understand what sparked this, what birthed this, and also what made this be the problem that you wanted to tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for a little bit of kind of brief background, you alluded to this, but I come from the world of being kind of a healthcare data nerd. I spent a lot of time on the back end of things, figuring out how do we kind of connect different data sets for research purposes, even for individual patients walking up to, the window at a hospital. How do I get a copy of my own medical record? What does it mean to consent for that to be shared with others? And so that's where a lot of my background in the space comes from. And when we were thinking about kind of founding the company, we were exploring different areas of how do we give patients more agency in this process, both in terms of being active participants in data sharing, but also in understanding the results of that. So if my information is being used in a study or being used by someone and they learn something interesting, I would love to know about that. And really the light bulb moment for Zenith in its current form came out of just, the combination of thinking about that problem space with my personal life. As a woman in my 30s, it feels like every person I know right now is going through their first pregnancies or an IVF journey or even freezing their eggs and thinking about family planning. And it was just beyond striking how little information is out there and how little support it feels like people get through this incredibly huge life phase. And again, even, folks who are highly educated with great access to the healthcare system, could see any specialist they want. Some of the problems is actually that your rheumatologist tells you one thing and your OB tells you the opposite. And then you're left here as a layman trying to figure out what that means and how you should, move forward. And so that kind of sparked for me, we're using real world data in all of these other areas, except for pregnancy. We just kind of say, well, that's hard to study. Do the best not to harm your baby and good luck. And so that was really kind of the founding insight on, we have all these pregnancies that are already happening in the real world. How do we actually learn from them and make use of that kind of real world data that's already happening?
I love that you started with your background because I did want to go deeper into your personal origin and your founder path as well. You're a first-time founder, yes. And I guess before we go into more of the breakdown of Zenith and how that supports, how was it for you making the leap as a first-time founder? Did you find yourself facing the questions, am I ready for this? Or are you just more of a, let's just do this and figure it out?
Quite honestly, a little bit of both. I think I started, I always say I started my founder journey long before I was actually a founder. I kind of have gravitated through the course of my career to smaller and smaller projects within larger enterprises, starting back when I was outside of healthcare altogether at Zillow. And I really just kind of fell in love with this idea of how do you just scrap something together and really quickly get feedback on it and figure out if it's working. And then if it's working, how do you, make it bigger and grow it? And so kind of structurally, I've tried to do that through my career. And I keep coming back to this idea of, I just love being able to have this kind of white space. And so being a founder in the proper term was always really appealing to me. It's also terrifying. Right? When there's a world of different things you could be doing that you feel, qualified to do. And you're like, hey, I looked at that job description. I know how to do most of those things. Being a founder is a pretty scary leap to make from that, but it's been super exciting. And I think all of the cliches end up being true. And you kind of learn that through the journey. And, everyone says, oh, it's lonely. And you're like, yeah, but I'm really tough and I really care about this problem. So it'll be okay. And then you go through all of the things that makes this really challenging, but it's been super, super rewarding and certainly would not trade it.
I'm curious if there was a series of moments or one defining moment where you said, I'm just going to take this leap of faith, even if you've been building up to it. And I'm curious also, how has it been for you, even earlier on, that you already feel that it's rewarding and worth it in the right path, if that makes sense? Because from what I witnessed, and just on my own journey, it's, you need serious conviction along the way. because it's really hard to kind of get a snapshot of, is this the right thing, or, are things going well?
Yeah, I would say, I don't know, the exact moment is a little bit hard to pin down. I think it was largely, I have a theory that you should always think things through from multiple perspectives, meaning think about it during the workday, think about it when you're talking to friends casually, think about it when you're exercising, thinking about it when you have a glass of wine after work, whatever. And kind of through all of those moments, I reached the conclusion, if not now, then when. And I knew that structurally, I think the work was something that I at least wanted to feel suited for. And so I felt like, this is something we can obviously time box. Obviously, there's very real kind of capital and time constraints on doing something like this. And so I really kind of wanted to give myself the shot and see if it worked. And in reaching conviction, it's this funny thing, especially when we were in kind of the idea maze before landing on Zenith in its exact current form. I mentioned we were thinking kind of broadly about how patients have, more agency in these data flows. And you kind of realize there is a moment when you reach that point of conviction when people start to say, oh, well, have you thought about this and this and this? And you're like, I don't care. This is such an important, why are you asking me these questions? That doesn't even matter because this is this is such a big problem. And it kind of happens overnight in this way where you realize, oh, that's the kind of conviction that I've been looking for when you're, intellectualizing a lot, oh, is this an important market? And is the market big? And is the problem important? And you just realize you kind of at some point get to this visceral, that all matters and it's important, but really your pull to just solve the problem because it is so clear and so apparent and you feel so kind of drawn to it is, for me at least, what gave me that moment of conviction and clarity.
I love that. Well, I think that the problem was actually where I wanted to go next. So I'm a mom of two. And for myself, when I was navigating pregnancy, fertility, definitely had my challenges. I was using a lot of what I would call more traditional resources. So Baby Center, certainly had friends that were referencing what to expect, both book and online. And then, of course, now we have all the LLMs in addition to Google. And so I guess I'm curious from your perspective, what you're seeing the problem is, both from a data perspective and both what pregnant women are asking for. Are they trying to get pregnant? Are they already pregnant? I'm just curious as to what your approach is, because there is a lot of information out there, and how you navigate and how you validate, that's a different story.
Yeah, the starting place for us was actually on the data side. So fundamentally, there is a massive lack of research on an almost endless list of pregnancy and pregnancy adjacent topics. The main reason for this, not to get too kind of scientific, is because pregnant women are generally excluded from clinical trials for reasonably good reason, right? We don't ethically want to expose, a baby to something if we don't even know if it's safe for an adult. But what that means is that every time a new drug is approved, every time a new procedure, is going through these processes, we just don't know what that means for pregnant people. And so we've kind of landed on most of the general knowledge skews towards better not because it's probably really risky. But the problem that we saw is if you go on Reddit or the What to Expect forums or any of these places, I'll take my favorite example, which is melatonin. Today, the scientific literature and research and most providers will say, we don't really know if it's safe. It hasn't been tested fully, probably just avoid it. But insomnia is one of the biggest pregnancy symptoms. It's something that people experience every day. If you look at Reddit for 5 minutes, you'll see thousands of women had said, basically, screw it. It doesn't seem like it could be that risky. I'm going to take it anyways. And thousands of women have experienced insomnia and decided it seems risky. I'm not going to take the chance. So why are we not actually learning from all of these experiences and trying to build a data set from these real experiences? And instead today we kind of say, well, it would be hard to study ethically in a clinical trial, so therefore just avoid it. And so really that's where we're coming from is, hey, the data actually is out there. There are different kind of constructs you can look at things through with observational research and amassing a data set at enough scale that you can actually start to learn some interesting things and help give a little bit more confidence to moms through real data rather than just saying avoid out of an abundance of caution. And so there's both the data side, which is going to be really helpful for researchers, for pharmaceutical companies who have new drugs coming to market, as well as for moms who, everyone has their own risk benefit tolerance. And so how do you actually see real data and kind of facts to make that personal decision based on?
Makes sense. And I certainly wish I had this tool when I was going through both my pregnancies. And I'm curious, at this stage of company, if your core user is someone who is scrolling Reddit and scanning those communities, but unsure or where potentially your data set and your offering slots in. Because I think, as you and I both know, Reddit is an active source for both fertility questions, right? Both for pregnancy questions, but it's also hard to validate the quality of the information. And yet we go there.
Yeah, I would say this is something that we've learned too, honestly, in our journey so far since our launch. I am a very kind of pragmatic person by nature. And so I'm like, this is great. One-stop shop, like you're going to get your answer and it's going to be super clear and amazing. And one of the things we've learned is that no decision in pregnancy, but I would say probably in health generally, is like a one-stop shop. I mean, think even outside of pregnancy, it's like you go to your doctor, they tell you one thing, you go home, you Google it, you look at Reddit, and then you synthesize kind of all of that information together and decide, what you want to do. I think pregnancy is very similar in that right now there is a big gap where there isn't a factual resource oftentimes. And so people are trying to kludge together what they heard from a TikTok influencer. And, I always joke there's two answers that you can get on Reddit, no matter what the question is. Number one is, well, my sister-in-law did that and her baby turned out just fine. And the other is, well, my sister-in-law did that and her baby only had 3 limbs. And so you can kind of like find any extreme and any anecdote that you want. And so we really view ourselves as like plugging into that, not necessarily replacing the community aspect or, again, sometimes you just want to hear, yep, someone else did that and they turned out totally fine. And that's really reassuring and that's what you need in the moment. But we kind of view ourselves as augmenting today's landscape. If you want to say, all right, what does the data say? Now, I actually already did this. Am I going to be fine? There's a bunch of different things that you can kind of pull from and pull together. And hopefully we're a reputable and consistent source that people are kind of plugging into that process.
I love that. And I appreciate it both from a user standpoint and then also just from a business and a growth standpoint. And so I guess that kind of brings to the next segment, which is since launch, early days. I'd love to understand a little bit more around the approach, and assuming it's going to shift and pivot along the way, but how are you getting this into the hands of users so there is awareness, and how are you driving adoption?
It's a great question. So I am actually not a mom myself, but largely view myself as kind of in the demographic. So at the very beginning, it was so much just word of mouth and kind of being part of the community. We're New York City based, so we did a ton of actually in-person events, which was, we're a software business, so we don't technically need to do that, but it was a really great way to, sponsor a prenatal yoga class in the community and go and talk to 20 moms who are all pregnant and all kind of in this phase of their experience. So we found that to be a really helpful way of both getting awareness out. And, one of the things with Zenith is, given the universality of the experience of like having these questions and just like trying to get a straight answer, we found a lot of, friends and family, like word of mouth. We get one person, they send it to their pregnant friends group chat. I was at a bachelorette party earlier this summer where there were 3 pregnant moms and like we were all talking about this, right? And so we have had a lot of that like word of mouth aspect, especially for our kind of initial growth. And we've also been kind of exploring, along with the standard, social channels and search channels and all of that, actually B2B partnerships with providers and with doulas in particular, who have found a lot of value from our tool with something like this, where it's such a trust-based, product. We found that when you're doula, they can kind of pre-vet it in a sense and say, hey, I use this tool and it's actually really great. And this is what I'm going to be looking at. If you text me this question, you can just ask yourself and you can get involved. So we've seen that be a really successful kind of referral channel for us as well.
Got it. What would you say the current breakdown is when it comes to referrals between, say, B2B or partnerships versus users sharing about it with their community?
It's a good question. It's probably half and half. Attribution is half the battle. People say friends and family, and maybe they actually mean their doula. So it's like a little bit hard to tease it. I would say probably roughly half and half at this stage.
Wow, that's great.
And I think, again, for us, like just being able to have in the world we live in today, particularly in early 2026, with the way the last few months have gone with like public health and pregnancy and newborn vaccine recommendations changing, and is Tylenol actually safe or not? People really, really want to lean on someone that they already view as a trusted advisor to vet these things. And so I think that's why we've had really kind of good success with doulas and some of the B2B side as well.
How many active users, if you're willing to share, is currently in the community? And I'm curious kind of like what the goals are over the next 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, we have. So since our launch a few months ago, we have our first few hundred users, and we're looking to kind of scale that up. Of course, for us, there's a couple of different components. There's people who are using the tool just to get information and get evidence. And then there's also people who have opted in to contribute and share their information and their experiences. And so we're kind of working on both of those levers. I view it as building. Like, you're unlikely to share all of your experiences the first time you encounter us, but maybe after the first few times you use the tool and say, hey, this is actually, really reputable and really credible, I would love to get involved with the data sharing element of it. So really, we're focused on broadening our reach, making more and more moms aware of us so that we can kind of move them continually down funnel and hopefully earn their trust such that they share the data and kind of build this great data flywheel.
In terms of sharing, in terms of data inputs and the shares coming from moms, what is then the process of, I guess, filtering or qualifying that information where there's enough of a pool that it's applicable, if that makes sense, versus a one-on-one, individual experience?
So that's a great question. It's one that we spend a lot of time working on because the answer is the very healthcare unsatisfying. It depends. It depends on the question. It depends on when someone asks it. So right now, Penny is only pulling from externally available research. We've only been around for about 6 months. And just to do the quick math, right, a pregnancy is 9 months.
Yes.
The question I want to get through is if I do X during pregnancy, am I and my baby okay at childbirth? And so it actually takes a while to kind of amass not just the experiences. We could say, 100 people have taken melatonin, but we don't actually know, okay, and then what happened, which is the real kind of meat of the data. So we're certainly still amassing that. We have a fantastic epidemiologist who's on our team, Monica, who's leading a lot of our work around how do we know when we have enough aggregated information on a particular topic or question that we can start to share that back in a way that's meaningful and not misleading. So a very active and ongoing conversation internally.
Yeah, I love that. Is there I guess in terms of growing, so to me, a couple hundred active users within months of launching, I think that's incredible progress. I'm curious kind of as to what the milestones or the expected milestones in the growth path is. And then, of course, I'm curious about monetization and what that could potentially look like.
Yeah, I'll actually start with the monetization question because I think that leads to some of your other questions. Our goal is to keep this entirely free for moms. It's kind of my personal belief that information should be accessible no matter what your ability to pay is. And it's really great actually because our model is kind of predicated on researchers and pharmaceutical companies needing access. And in the case of pharma companies, actually having kind of mandated requirements to collect this data. I'll give an example because I think this is pretty obfuscated from the everyday person, but just take, autoimmune as a category. It is very, very predominantly affecting women. To the order of 80% plus minus of autoimmune patients are women, largely of childbearing age, the ages of 20 to 40. It's a very hot area for drug development. There's tons of new biologics and other therapies coming onto the market for things like rheumatoid arthritis, eczema, atopic dermatitis. But when these new drugs come to market, 80% of the patients are going to be women who are between 20 and 40. And we say, well, we have no idea what happens if you get pregnant tomorrow. So the FDA actually often mandates that the pharma companies in these cases collect data to understand what happens when people become pregnant, or maybe their provider has said the benefit outweighs the risk. You need to stay on this when you are pregnant. And so actually collecting that exposure data. So for us, that's actually kind of the way that we monetize, is by working with groups who are looking for this type of data to do their research projects, whether it's to understand a new question about pregnancy, whether it's to understand safety and efficacy of a particular drug during pregnancy. And so that's kind of the revenue stream that allows us to keep this free for moms. Yes. That actually is what informs a lot of our goals around users, which is, we can have 1 million users, which is great. Really what we kind of need is end users with a particular medication or a particular condition or a particular pregnancy complication, because that's what actually creates kind of a meaningful data set for each of these individual use cases. And so we've been focused on building pockets of density in some of those. So whether it's moms with gestational diabetes, whether it's, people who are going through pregnancy after having been on a GLP-1. So there's all sorts of different pockets that we're looking to build out.
So do you currently have pharma partnerships in place, or is that in the works?
So that's in the works. Largely anyone who's worked with a pharma company knows the first question is like, how many patients do you have? And so we're kind of getting to that initial density. That's why we're super focused in this phase on consumer acquisition and just reaching as many moms as possible so that we can start to get some irons in the fire with like proving these data sets out in these research.
And I guess to close the loop on listeners who are very much into this. So, say you're building out the data set or pool of mom, and like my example, I had preeclampsia. So let's say you're building out that pool and you're getting to a certain level of density, which you've defined. So then the moms are sharing their experience. And then I guess walk me through how the pharma companies are using that data, if that's from a direct shared experience versus, say, a clinical study.
So what the Pregnancy Evidence Project actually is it's a fully IRB governed research study. And so we collect different types of data. The primary type of data is through self-reported, surveys and questionnaires through moms. So you could say, here are different medications I took, here are my symptoms, I received my preeclampsia diagnosis on X date, and here's how, I managed it. When moms consent for the study, they also share their authorization to pull their medical records. And so we're really tying together both the experiential data as well as the clinical outcomes that are validated in the EHR. And so ultimately at the end, this is kind of as I was alluding earlier, it's a little bit of a hurry up and wait where like we get people in, and then once the baby has been born, then we're able to actually tie that together and say, okay, here's like the full picture of both what happened and what the outcome was.
And so actually when you and I connected, you were looking and exploring growth roles. So I guess the current assumption is bringing on someone to lead growth is focused on moms, on focus on user acquisition. What is the current thinking in terms of how to go about acquiring them? Is it more in-person activations? Is it more organic? Or is it all like TBD?
A lot of TBD. I think we have some hypotheses just based on kind of the way that things work. So some of our biggest paid channels right now have actually been Google search as well as Reddit, because we found those to be obviously super high intent. We kind of go after a lot of the keywords that nobody else is interested in, such as, can I eat brie cheese while I'm pregnant? Is a pretty unique term.
Oh, I love that.
Googling that. And then, they get the first result is penny, and then they find a great answer. Hopefully that's a really, easy way for them to get value. Similar to Reddit, it's like people are already searching for the questions that they would be asking penny. And so we've seen pretty good success with those types of channels. I also think partnerships are a really interesting area for us, whether that's with, the more traditional provider side or even other kind of women's interest, newsletters, businesses that, mom communities, all of these different areas where moms are kind of congregating together for this communal and tribal knowledge, but having kind of a resource embedded would be really beneficial for everyone involved as well. So I'd say those are some of our early hypotheses. We've also been testing a lot of organic social. You mentioned preeclampsia. We talked actually earlier this week on our TikTok around just new research studies that come out. And so we've gotten some interesting engagement that way as well, just because people are always excited to share their stories and hear kind of what's new, particularly if you've gone through something that was oftentimes fairly traumatic or distressing. And it's exciting to hear, research that could have, helped me or will help someone else in my situation.
What's really great about the mom community is it is really close-knit, and you're all facing very similar things, even at different points or at different stages of journey. So I can certainly see once you get into a couple of the more established communities, regardless of size, it can get it. There is a product-led growth that's built in, and absolutely, definitely naming the symptoms or the conditions, especially in pregnancy. It can be quite the intense experience, and I can see a lot of advocacy, being built from that. I'm curious as to how they're acquiring the data now, and are there folks in a similar approach when it comes to providing the data model for them, and or what's the market inefficiency there?
The way that they do this today is really the way that they run any other clinical study. So working with a contract research organization. And if you think about this, it makes sense in practice, right? These are the groups that run clinical trials for other areas. So, they're sitting in hospitals, they're enrolling patients. they're randomizing patients into treatment group versus placebo, etc. It's actually not that great of a model for pregnancy, which is very, very different than most other areas of clinical trials. Again, it takes a long time. You want to get someone right at the beginning of pregnancy and you need to monitor them through, the baby's first few months of life. B, it's incredibly decentralized. So think about like an oncology clinical trial. You're going to get most of the people you need to see by sitting in the top 20 academic medical centers that treat this type of cancer or, have these certain physicians. Whereas pregnancy happens everywhere to everyone at all times. Nobody is coming into a hospital once a week to kind of be this captive, data source that you're doing testing and collecting all of these measures. And so to no fault of their own, the CROs are not super well equipped to like run these studies effectively. Just to give an example, some of the ones that are running today have a website like pregnancymigraine.com, and you go on and it's a landing page and it says, if you want to join this pregnancy registry, call this 800 number. Most people with migraine who are pregnant don't know what pregnancy registry means other than like, where can I get diapers and baby oil and all this, are never going to call an 800 number because that's inconvenient. Why would I do that for something that I don't know what it is or if it's valuable to me? And so it's very not consumer oriented in a way that they actually need to like convince and recruit these people to get the data that they need. So in our conversations with a lot of these folks, they have a very hard time like reaching the actual target enrollment numbers that they're trying to get to learn something meaningful on the particular topic. So that's like one of the insights that we believe to be true, is that if you actually approach this in a consumer first standpoint and you provide value to women through, the Penny tool and giving them information and tools on their journey, you actually can have a much easier time of identifying and, getting them to share this sensitive data such that we can actually learn something from it. Because I think the current construct is really, really hard for pharma companies to actually connect with the women that they need to provide this.
That makes so much sense. And we have clients where we've even ran ad campaigns for them to generate leads into their study. So that makes so much sense. I get that. Well, I love this conversation, and I personally am just very excited about this white space, this gap in the market that you're solving, because I've gone through it. I have friends that have gone through it or will be going through it. So I love what you're aiming to solve here.
Thank you. Yeah. Back to one of your earlier questions. I think it feels very meaningful, particularly building in this like healthcare consumer world where I'll get texts or emails. I got an email recently from someone who said, I found out about your tool from Google and I have used it every single day since I found out in my first trimester. And like, that's the kind of thing that is just so makes me feel so happy that like we're actually helping people, improve their quality of life on a day-to-day basis, which I think is often something you don't get as much working in the very, very critical, but like somewhat removed, B2B side of healthcare. Even, I spent a lot of time in interoperability, which you can see why it's impactful, but it's really hard to like feel that on a daily basis. And so it's been so great to hear from so many women that have seen value.
I love that. And I think, what's extra sweet in your case is that you also have the at scale B2B side of things where you can massively impact in some ways a lot faster than, while you're building up on the user customer side. So I think you really have like both worlds, happening for you.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
So good. Well, thank you. I can't wait to share this with our communities, and we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Destinee.